were, as you'd expect, as they were aging, their movements were getting worse, as shown by this increase in the score. Okay? That's exactly, the gene, the bad gene, was sadly doing its job. The critical group, or the third group, those who were genetically identical to these guys, but had had enriched environment. What would happen to them? Would their movements be as bad as those in the standard housing? One bad gene, guaranteed you're going to get a bad movement. Well, let's just look. There they are. And you might imagine. So these guys, the score is much, much lower, about 20%, that of the main group, and the age of onset is much later. So the age of onset is later, the degree of impairment is much more modest. So my case rests. I don't want to labour on about genes because we're going to get on to talk about creativity. I hope I've convinced you that a gene is not an autonomous unit. A gene doesn't set the agenda unconditionally. A gene is necessary, but it is not sufficient for the final outcome. It is necessary, but not sufficient. It interacts all the time with events in the environment which will turn it on or off, other genes will turn on and off, and so on. So it's a much more interactive and complex scenario than, for example, the Daily Mail would have you believe. So, there is no one-to-one relationship, at least in the CNS, between a single gene and a complex mental trait. So that's the point I was making. And if you read the Daily Mail, you'll get, oh, perhaps even some scientists talk about the gene for this or that. I love this, but I couldn't resist this. This idea that you could dial up your life partner just by looking at their genes. And here we have some optimistic lady hoping for someone with humour, dependability, understanding, and conversation skills. And we all know that no one has those four things together. Hands up, anyone has humour, dependability, understanding, and conversation skills. I don't know, I've yet to meet them. And so I don't think the trick is to go to get your life partner this way. There we are, which I was hoping for. So, I mean, I'm joking, but similarly, this might apply also for planning your child. You know, some people fear in the future that before the embryo is implanted, you could have a genetic analysis or cherry picking in this way of having a child who's got those four traits as well. Now, that's done, I know, as an absurd speculation, but the way some people talk about genes and mental function is almost going along with that idea. So let's look instead at what really happens. And the fabulous thing about being born a human being is that, let's say compared to a goldfish, is that when you're born as a human being, you're born with pretty much all the brain cells you'll have. But the exciting thing is this, that it is the growth of the connections between the brain cells that accounts for the growth of the brain after birth. So even if you are a clone, that is to say genetically identical to someone else, to your identical twin, you are going to have, this is really exciting, a unique configuration of brain cell connections. No one for the last 100,000 years has had a brain like yours. And after you leave this planet, no one ever again will have a brain like yours. They might have a liver like yours, lungs like yours, heart like yours, but they're not going to have a brain like yours. Your brain is a one-off. It's what makes you a unique person, even if you're a clone. And this is because these brain connections, and the exquisite thing about us, is they are going to be reflecting experience every moment you're alive. Now let's compare that with, let's say, the goldfish. I don't know if your kids have got any goldfish as pets, but let's be brutal. If the goldfish died while your child was at school, you could sneak off to the pet shop, purchase another goldfish, let's be brutal, and the kid would get no difference. Eh? Now you couldn't do that with a cat or dog, and they might want you to, but you couldn't do it with their brothers or sisters. Yeah? So as the brain becomes more sophisticated, you can't just replace one with another, because you start to have individual repertoires of behaviour. Even little hamsters are getting used to being handled and so on. And so the more sophisticated the brain, the more you shift away from the imperatives of the genes, the dictates of the stereotype repertoire that characterises, say, the goldfish, through to a much more personalised repertoire of behaviour that is in turn the result of adaptation. And human beings occupy more niches than any other species on the planet. Not because we run particularly fast, we're not particularly strong, we don't see particularly well. What we do fantastically is we adapt, and we adapt more brilliantly than any other species. Our brains, your brains, are built to change to every moment you are alive, to change those connections. This is what neuroscientists call plasticity, not meaning, of course, that the brain is made of plastic, but from the old Greek origin, plastikos, meaning adaptable or changeable.